Welcome to the Friendly Circle Berlin. Today's workshop is with Barb Nangle. Barb is a respected boundaries coach and speaker who brings her authentic, no nonsense approach to helping people in recovery discover their real identity and create healthy boundaries. Drawing from her personal recovery experience, including 12-step work, Barb offers practical tools and strategies that empower individuals to move from feeling fragmented to whole. This is part one of a three-part workshop series titled Discover Your Real Identity, Repair Your Life from the Inside Out. And today, Barb will guide participants through the essential aspects of boundary setting for adult children and those in recovery. Her approach is raw, honest, and refreshingly direct, but always focused on transformation. Barb specializes in helping people who struggle with overgiving, people pleasing, and difficulty identifying what's theirs to manage versus what belongs to others. Through her program, Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, she teaches participants how to protect their peace, minimize triggers, and anchor their boundaries and personal values. Today, Barb will share insights on how to step out from behind masks, discover your authentic self, and create the healthy connections that lead to lasting recovery and wholeness. Well, Barb, I really want to thank you for putting on this wonderful series for us. We really appreciate you very, very much. And now I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks again, Barb.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am Barb. I'm an adult child, codependent, and abstinent compulsive overeater, which is our tradition in my area, in my ACA meetings, to say all of the seats that we occupy. I'm really, really excited to be here. I want to thank Nikki for bringing me into the circle. And I want to thank Patrick and Matea for meeting with me and inviting me to come along. Today is a very auspicious day for me to be doing this because 10 years ago today was my very first 12-step recovery program meeting. I went to Codependence Anonymous. I no longer belong to that fellowship. I'm now a member of ACA, which is called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. ACA is a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover from childhood trauma, which results from intergenerational family dysfunction. And I'm also a member of Overeaters Anonymous. I'm an abstinent compulsive overeater and sugar addict. So my journey started 10 years ago today, and it feels absolutely delightful to be here carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer. And because I think of my core wound as codependence, learning how to build boundaries changed everything for me. And the workshop that we're doing today and next week is something I actually developed a couple years ago for the ACA World Service Convention. I've done it a couple of times there, and I've done it at other conventions as well. And I wrote it specifically for people in 12-step recovery and very specifically for people in ACA. But even if you're not in one of those programs, I think you're going to be able to identify with that. So I want to start with some housekeeping. So actually, let me share my screen. So in addition to being a woman in recovery, I'm a boundaries coach. I have my contact information on here. I'm also going to have it on the last slide. And I'm going to ask you to do an evaluation at the end for me. And if you do, you're going to get an additional worksheet on top of the things that are included here. And I'll have my contact information there as well. But before I really get into it, I want to share this quote that's been really helpful for me. Boundaries are limits that I set for myself. It's not about what other people choose. It's about what I choose to participate in. So this is another way that I think of it is boundaries are for me, not against you. This is something for you to keep in mind in your own head. There might be some people you might say this to, but I don't recommend walking around saying this. So for housekeeping, we've put some worksheets in the chat. If you can't print them out or you don't have them, it's okay. I recommend you have a separate piece of paper for questions for me. I'm going to take questions at the end. And then I also recommend having something like if you have a notebook, but you might not want to put your questions in the notebook because you might lose them. So that's just that was the recommendation when I did a pilot of this workshop for people. So, all right. So, and then this is kind of silly, but kind of not. I want to make sure every single one of you knows that you have permission to practice building boundaries for as long as it takes without guilt or shame, because so many people either don't set boundaries or they cave on their boundaries because of the guilt and shame. So you might want to take a screenshot of this and print it out for yourself and write your name there. All right, so if you are someone who would like to join me in a guided visualization, I invite you to do that. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to either close your eyes or lower your gaze. And I don't really understand why this kind of exercise works, but I also don't understand how electricity works. I just know that it does. But the idea is, I want you to think about what is a protective boundary or barrier that might make you feel safe? So it could be a fairy circle, it could be a force field, it could be a golden net, an invisibility cloak, some kind of a bubble. Whatever you come up with. I had a client say that it was a superhero outfits. A couple people have said, under the covers. One woman said, my grandmother's cottage. So a place where you can physically, in your mind, imagine yourself being, where there's a boundary around you, where you are safe psychologically, emotionally, physically, psychically, spiritually, from anything that might in any way disturb you. So actually, let me go back for a moment. So now, if you're going to join me in this, I invite you to either close your eyes or lower your gaze and envision this boundary and take a nice deep breath. Make your exhale longer than your inhale and just sort of relax into the safety, comfort, and protection of this location. And I want you to bask in that sense of safety for a few moments. And if there's anything or anyone that you might bring into that place with you, so it could be a pet, it could be a stuffed animal, a blanket, it could be a human being, it could be a deity, it could be an amulet, it could be a person from history or a fictional character. If it would increase your sense of safety and protection. If not, you can stay in there alone. Let's take another couple of deep breaths. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze. And what I want to share with you is this boundary is available to you anywhere you can think a thought. You can create this anywhere and anytime you can think a thought. In other words, at any time. So you could be in the middle of a difficult conversation and you can invoke this boundary. Now, it's probably going to be easier if you know that you're going to have a difficult conversation to invoke this boundary for yourself ahead of time to energetically protect yourself. If it's going to be a super difficult conversation, I recommend you not only protect yourself, but also protect the other person to keep their energy contained in yours. This has been really, really helpful to me. I basically never need to do it anymore, but in the beginning, I needed to do it a lot. All right, and I'm gonna move. Oh, someone shared this with me. So for people in the United States, The Wizard of Oz is a classic movie, and this is a character from The Wizard of Oz, and a client shared this with me, and I felt like I really needed to share this here. All right, so I'm going to share with you two of the most important things that really, really helped me to go from 50 something years of having no boundaries to having such healthy boundaries that I now coach people on how to have healthy boundaries. So the first one is the shift happened for me in that I came to care more what I think of me than what other people do. So this doesn't mean I don't care what other people think of me. Of course I do. What it means is that I used to be willing to throw my integrity out the window to get people's approval. So I would say yes to things I didn't want to do. I would say things were fine when they weren't. I would volunteer for things I didn't really want to do. And so what I'm saying is I was basically lying and manipulating. I was trying to get people to like me. That's called manipulation. I was being untrue, I was being dishonest. And when I first learned that stuff, I was like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. I lie and I manipulate. You know what? You're not a horrible person if you're doing that. These patterns came from somewhere. Like we developed these as survival mechanisms. They're just not working for us anymore. So now I'm not willing to throw my integrity out the window anymore. I want you to approve of me, but I don't, with clause, need you to approve of me the way that I used to. And I really care more about being an honest woman of integrity than getting your approval. So it's okay to seek people's approval, but only if you have your own approval first. And then the second thing is, I didn't realize for a couple of years how important the women in my 12-step group were in helping me to set boundaries. As we say in recovery, we're protected when we're connected. I needed them to say things to me like, you're doing the right thing, Barb. You're not a bad person. Maybe you don't want to say it like that. Keep your hands away from the keyboard. But having their support, I kind of took it for granted while I was going through the process. And on reflection, I realized I don't know that I could have made it without them. So I highly recommend if you're going to go on a boundary building journey, you don't do it alone, whether that's with a coach like me or with your 12-step recovery fellows or in some other kind of support group. I highly recommend getting help from other people. All right, so before we get started, worksheet number 1, which again, if you don't have the printout, you don't have it. I want to start with everybody realizing that you have done things and you've done them well and you've gotten better at them over time. So I'm going to give you a couple of, I'm going to say 60 seconds. I want you to name 5 things you've gotten better at over time. And if you are thinking, I'm not doing this exercise, this is ridiculous, you're exactly who I want to have do this. So this could be, you got better at riding a bicycle, cutting up vegetables, fixing things, coloring, painting, spreadsheets, whatever it is. So 5 things you've gotten better at over time. And you don't have to share this with anybody if you don't want to, but if you want to put something in the chat, you can go ahead and do that. Ten more seconds. All right, I'm going to move on. All right, so one of the things that 12-step recovery does for us is it teaches us boundaries when we don't even know that it's teaching us boundaries. The way that I think of it is I learned boundaries from the outside in first. So I'm going to give you some examples that are very specific to ACA. Some of them are the same in other 12-step recovery programs. But there are a bunch of slogans that are common in 12-step recovery that are all about boundaries. So one day at a time. So we put a boundary on how far ahead we're working on things, which is we're staying in today. We've got a boundary around the amount of time that we're really working on, like staying sober, staying abstinent, not, caretaking for people that can take care of themselves. Live and let live. So that means you live your life and you let them live their life. So the boundary is between you and basically everybody else. Just for today, same as one day at a time. It's just today. We've got a boundary around the time that we're worrying about. There are common meeting practices that are all about boundaries. So especially in ACA, I know it's not the same in every meeting, but there's a no crosstalk rule in ACA. And in fact, it's so important in ACA that we don't crosstalk that we wrote a booklet about it because many of us weren't heard when we were children, or we were heard and we were told that we were wrong. And so not cross-talking is huge. It was enormous for me to not give unsolicited advice, to not comment on what people had to say, to not try to fix people, and to focus on me. not on them. In most of the meetings that I go to, we time how long people have to share so that there's time for everybody to share. That's a boundary. You're supposed to try to get your share in within the boundary of that time. Typically, meetings begin and end on time. They're predictable because many of us have had chaotic lives and we can't count on anything. But if the meeting starts at 7, it's going to start at 7. If it ends at 8:15, it's going to end at 8:15. Rotation of service. This is a common practice in 12-step recovery. The idea is you don't get to be in charge all the time. We share responsibility. So there's a boundary around the time that you're supposed to give service in a particular role. We say what's heard in a meeting stays in a meeting. So we have a boundary around the content of the meeting. And then there's a document that's foundational to ACA, and it's called the solution. And so there's a couple of quotes from there. One of the things it says in there is we keep the focus on ourselves in the here and now. So that's 3 boundaries in one. The focus is here on ourselves. It's right here where I am right now, and it's now. And then we reparent ourselves. We're not asking our parents to reparent us. We're not asking our sponsor to reparent us or our fellow travelers. We're doing it ourselves. And then we restructure our sick thinking. We're not asking someone else to change the way that we thought, because in ACA, the main thing that we're powerless over is the effects of growing up with an alcoholic or dysfunctional family. And the main effects are that we have distorted thinking. All right, and then there's the tradition. So when we have group autonomy, that means outside the group, people don't get to tell us what we're doing inside the group. We have one primary purpose: to carry the message of people who still suffer from whatever the issue is for that program. We don't have 20 purposes, we have one. We don't have outside endorsements. So only the people that are in the program get to really share, and we don't take sponsorships or anything like that from anybody else. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. So the people in the group are the ones that support it. And we're forever non-professional. So if somebody might be a professional in the group, but if they're acting in a service position in the group, they're acting out of their membership status, not out of their professional status. And then we don't share opinions on outside issues. We can have opinions, but we don't share them in a meeting. And so there's a boundary between what it is we're going to talk about in a meeting. And then anonymity, which is absolutely huge. So anonymity means that everybody's voice has the same value. It means many, many things. I used to think when I first came in, I'm ashamed that I'm in this program and I don't want people to know. And that might be the case for some people. Some people, it's not safe for people to know that they're in the program. But the idea is that we protect people's anonymity so that they can be safe. But also we want every person to have the same respect as everybody else. No one voice is more important than another. And then, of course, there's the serenity prayer. And I think of the serenity prayer as being all about boundaries. So we want to focus, we want courage to change things that we can. We want acceptance for things we can't change. And then we want wisdom to know what's the difference, which are the things I can change and cannot change. So going on to step 1 in ACA, we say, I am powerless over the effects of alcoholism and family dysfunction. Well, according to ACA literature, the main effects of growing up in an alcoholic or otherwise dysfunctional family are fear and distorted thinking. And so these page references are a reference to what we affectionately call the Big Red Book in ACA. The actual name of it is Adult Children of Alcoholics. And it specifically mentions that on these pages. So I want to remind you what we're saying in ACA is my thinking is the largest part of my problem. Some of us call it stinking thinking. So I've got some frameworks to help me with my thinking that come from just being in 12-step recovery. So I love what management guru Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. So what I mean by that here is the end is I'm headed towards step 12, which is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We tried to carry this message to others who still suffer and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So this is where I'm headed. This is a framework that I'm looking at. So, a spiritual awakening, some people might say it's the ability to be, see, think, do, have, and believe that which you could not before recovery. So, it may or may not have anything to do with God or some kind of religion or some kind of deity or spirit, or it might not. But the main idea is that you are changed as a result of going through the 12 steps. And then it says we practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, technically, what it means is the principles that are connected to each of the steps and the traditions, which ironically are not the same in every 12-step fellowship. So in the ACA fellowship, these are the principles that are connected to each of the steps. And so in my personal life, the way I think of practicing these principles in all my affairs is my principles. So what are my top values? If I am practicing these principles in all my affairs, then I am living in spiritual alignment. And if we do these kinds of things, we're much less likely to relapse. So we want to live in alignment with spiritual principles. And then we tried to carry this message to those who still suffer. So what's the message that we're carrying? The message is, I'm changed because of this program, and you can too. And the message is also, I'm trying to practice these principles in all my affairs. So these are frameworks for us to think about. This is where we're headed. And so when we want to start thinking like this, we're coming out of the distorted thinking. And so the reason that I'm here today partially is to do 12-step work, to let others know you too can change. You are not terminally unique. You are not beyond hope. It is never too late, and everyone can be healed. No one is beyond the hope of healing. All right, so back to the distorted thinking. This quote right here changed my life. I heard it on a recovery podcast early in recovery. And at the time, I thought of myself as a super positive, optimistic person. And when I got in recovery, I realized I was almost like scanning the horizon at all times, looking for reasons to beat myself up. And when I heard this, info, not ammo, I understood it means this is information for you to learn, integrate, and grow from. This is not ammunition for you to beat yourself up, because beating yourself up ends up in you being battered and bruised, and that is no place from which to grow and change. And if you're here today, it's probably because you want to grow and change. So when you're learning new things about yourself, which always happens in recovery, and always happens when you're building healthy boundaries, I encourage you to think of it as info, not ammo. In other words, we want to go from self-judgment to self-compassion. And the bridge to go from self-judgment to compassion is curiosity. So when we say info, not ammo, we're talking about coming from the perspective of curiosity, which I love because curiosity is neutral. So info, not ammo. This is a new way for you to think. Here's another one. Go as far as you can see. When you get there, you can see further. So some people might think, I've got this ball of yarn of chaos of my life, and I'm trying to pull the strings and I don't know how it's going to work out. You just go take the next right action. Go as far as you can see. When you get there, you can see further. If you allow yourself to focus on, I don't know how it's going to happen, you will never take action. By taking action, going as far as you can see, the how will be revealed to you. And then I love this one. Anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. In my era, we were often told anything worth doing is worth doing right. And you know what? That might be so. But anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. To expect yourself to be perfect out of the gate is distorted thinking. It's patently unrealistic. So if you think about babies, when they learn to walk, they tumble, they toddle, they stumble, they fall. And they don't give up and lay on the ground for the rest of their lives. They get up and they try again. They're willing to do it badly at first. And ironically, It's the falling and then pushing themselves up from falling that builds the strength in their legs that allows them to walk. So, in other words, falling is part of learning to walk. So, anything worth doing is worth doing badly at first. So, if you're thinking, I should know how to do this before I ever learned how to do it, that's distorted thinking. And then I love this one too. You don't get better at something by not doing it. I was first told this when I decided to become an entrepreneur. I met somebody who was helping boost entrepreneurs, and I was like, I want to be a coach, but I don't know how to do it. And she said, well, you got to start coaching people. And I was like, but I don't know how. And she said, Barb, you don't get better at something by not doing it, which sounds really obvious when she says it like that. So when it comes to boundaries, you don't get better at setting boundaries by not setting boundaries. It's good to like read about them and talk about them and listen about them and write about them, but you have to set boundaries. And, speaking of, not getting better, getting better at something by, excuse me, speaking of not getting better at something by not doing it, if you're willing to do something badly at first, it makes it easier to experiment. So when I first started setting boundaries, I didn't know that was what I was doing. But the first time that I was really clear, this is me setting a boundary, this was me. Wham! Ooh, ugh, way too harsh. Now, if I had known that it was going to be way too harsh, that is not the boundary that I would have set. But I knew it was too harsh by the way that it felt to me. Now, can you imagine if I was like, that's it, I give up, I'm no good at setting boundaries? No, we have to experiment because you don't know what your limits are because you've never had them before. So you have to experiment. You have to be willing to do that. And then any human change process, it's a slow process. Quitting won't speed it up. So many people want to get good at something right away. And when they don't, they stop. And so this is why, at least in the United States, I don't know about other countries, but in January and February, all the gyms are full of people who made New Year's resolutions about getting fit. And by March, they're empty again because people want the quick fix. All right, so worksheet number 2, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what is something that you have been afraid to do badly. What is something you've not been doing that you want to get better at? And then what is something you've given up on because it's too slow? So I'm going to give you probably about 90 seconds to do this. So I'll take a look at my clock here. All right, I see people looking up, so we're going to go forward. So somebody shared this with me in early recovery, and I love it. I have it hanging on my refrigerator. Like when we get in, we're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be on an upward trajectory. You are going to be on an upward trajectory, but it's not going to be a linear upward trajectory. All right, so I really, really love this quote. When you say yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself. This is what I did my entire life. It wasn't like I was saying no to myself. I wasn't even considering myself. All right. And so we mentioned at the beginning that the name of my podcast is called Fragmented to Whole. And I want to give you a tiny little bit of backstory about that. One of the things that's happened for me in recovery is that I now have the ability to look back at my life before recovery and say, here's what I was doing, here's what I was thinking, and here's what my motives were with crystal clarity. Whereas back then, I was blind to it. So, one of the many things that became clear to me is that before recovery, I had this notion that I was a bunch of fragmented pieces, something like this, that were sort of floating around in space. And there was space between the fragments, which meant other people's shit could leak into my territory. And the process of 12-step recovery, especially the part about building healthy boundaries, helped me to integrate those fragmented pieces into one coherent whole. I also got rid of the pieces that weren't authentically me. And personally, my real identity, my real shape is a blue oval. That may seem like, what does that mean to other people? I just know that I'm a blue oval. Maybe you know, like, oh, I'm a triangle, I'm a star, I'm purple, whatever. Maybe it means nothing to you, but it means something to me. I know that I'm not a rectangle with a bunch of fragments in it. I am whole now. And who doesn't want to be whole? So one of the things that I realized is one of the reasons I became so fragmented, partly, and there's a lot of reasons. One of them was that I was dishonest all the time. I came into recovery thinking, well, I'm an honest person. No, I'm not. I lied about cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, relationships, but I especially lied in the people-pleasing department and said yes to things I didn't want to do, all that sort of stuff. The other thing besides dishonesty that I think really contributed to my to my fragmentation was I had all these different masks or facades up. And what I realized is that I don't have to use facades to protect myself. I was doing it because I didn't want people to judge me. I didn't want them to reject me. I didn't want them to abandon me. I didn't want them to punish me. And what I realized over time is I'm going to be judged. Humans are judging, discerning creatures. We make judgments. So, how about if I get judged for the actual me instead of some fake version of me? So that means I'm not as afraid to set boundaries because I'm letting them know who I really am, which is this is not okay. So I'm going to give you some examples of my own personal masks. And then I'm going to have you think about what might be some of yours. So one of my masks was, I can afford this. Every single financial problem I have ever had in my life had to do with my codependence. So I was either buying people's affection, managing my image, or rescuing, fixing, and saving people. So I declared bankruptcy back in 1999 when my student loans came due because I couldn't handle paying them on top of all the credit card debt I had because of the codependent behavior. So I was always like, I can afford this. Another mask was, I have my shit together. And I wanted people to think that 24 hours a day, 365 years a day, in every conceivable circumstance, I have got it together. And God forbid you see behind the mask and know that I have flaws. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how to do something. Like that was just not possible for me to share with people. Another one was, I have all the time in the world for you. I don't need to put myself for, I'm happy to make sacrifices for you. And I don't need help. Like, I'm the helper. I'm the person that people come to for help. I've got this. And then another one was, I like what you like, really. And this was especially true for the men that I dated. I just took on like their interests as if they were mine, and they weren't. And what I learned is that learning how to build healthy boundaries, it's almost like you're carving away the pieces that are not legitimately and authentically you. So you can see that, I've established or identified my real identity by building healthy boundaries and figuring out like what's okay with me and what's not okay with me. So notice when I have this blue oval superimposed on all those wonky shapes, that it still contains some aspects or my mass or fake identity. So here's what I mean by that. So for mass number one, I do want to be generous with people, but I don't need to act like I can afford things that I can't and go into debt. With number two, I do want to come across as a competent, capable person. I am in many respects, but not under every circumstance at all times. I'm allowed to fall apart. I'm allowed to have flaws. I'm allowed to not know things. I want to be generous with my time in number three, but now I'm generous with my time because I make decisions strategically rather than at the drop of a hat. I do things to help other people out of choice rather than compulsion or obligation. And then I want to be someone who's relatively self-sufficient, and I am, but I love help now. I'm actually in the only first and only healthy relationship I've ever had in my life. Thank you, 12-step recovery and boundaries. We've been together for 6.5 years, and he actually provides more support to me than I do to him, which has always been, that's the opposite. But he doesn't work and I do, and he's also very handy, so he helps me around my home. And then I want to be agreeable, like number 5, but I don't need to act like I like things I don't and spend years going to restaurants I don't like or participating in hobbies that I don't like. So, what I want you to do now, oh, and what I want to say is that I basically morphed myself out of proportion. So those identities were not entirely fake masks. That's why I did these wonky shapes like this. So what I want you to think about now and write out on worksheet 3 are what are some of your masks or fake identities that you've been using to protect yourself from rejection, from punishment, from lack of acceptance, from abandonment, from judgment. So I'm going to actually go back to my page to share the ones that I had. I find that a lot of people, like the ones I have, are not unique to me. Lots of people have them, but you might have different ones. And then we're not going to take the time today in this workshop to do this, but what I recommend you do afterwards is think about, now that you've written down what these masks or fake identities are, what would you like the real identity to be? It might not come like next week, but knowing like what would feel like really good to me, and knowing, like, beginning with the end in mind, this is the kind of person that I would like to be, will be helpful. So I'm going to give you at least a minute for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. All right, and so now I often use the metaphor of property when it comes to teaching people about boundaries. It's very common, lots of people do that. So, one of the things at the very beginning of the call, Patrick said, some people said that we should call this workshop the Berlin Wall. And I said, nope, because that is a myth. There's a lot of people who think that boundaries are like walls. 99% of boundaries are not. Like if you have a violent person in your life, yes, you need a wall, but most of the time they're flexible. So I love this metaphor of having a healthy boundary is like having a fence with a gate in it. So the fence or the boundary itself is yours. You own it. It's your property. And then also metaphorically, what's inside the boundary is yours. And again, this is a metaphor. It's not perfect. So they don't belong to other people. You are the gatekeeper. So one way to think about that is the gate opens from the inside only. In other words, if someone is trampling your property, they didn't jump the fence, you let them in, and it's your job to shepherd them out and or keep them out. You are making the decisions about your boundaries. Other people are not. It's up to you to decide who gets in and then what you're going to do if they try to get in. You can't farm this out to someone else. You can't hire a property manager for that. So if you set a boundary with someone and they don't honor it and you do nothing, it's not really a boundary. I tell my clients those are hopes and wishes. I wish they would listen to me. I wish they would change. I hope they'll act differently towards me. You are the one that has to actually have some kind of a consequence, which means you're going to do something. So you need to honor your boundaries, even if others don't. And I would say most especially if other people don't. And I do want to say, like, there are a whole host of reasons that people don't respect people's boundaries. One might be they forgot because you've never been like that before. Two could be they don't really believe you because you've never done it before. And another one could be they have horrible boundaries themselves, which means it's even more important for you to have consequences for your boundaries. So if they don't respect your boundaries, you have to do something. You have to have some kind of consequence. And I heard somebody say this one time, they don't work like an invisible dog fence, which I thought was hilarious. Like, wouldn't that be great? I set a boundary and people just get zapped and I don't have to do anything about it. Well, that's not reality. That's not what happens. So, and then the other thing I mentioned at the beginning, one of the top two things that really helped me with boundaries was being connected to healthy, supportive other people on the same journey as me. So we are wired for connection. Humans are pack animals. And we need connections to other people to be fully human. We need a reflection back from other people. You're here, you exist, you matter. I see you, I hear you, so that we can feel like we are here, we are participating, and we need reflection back from other people about who we are. The problem for many of us without healthy boundaries is that we didn't have models of healthy connection or healthy separation growing up. Instead, we were either enmeshed or we were abandoned, or maybe both, which is what happened to me. And so, what that means is that we're terrified of setting boundaries because it feels like abandonment. We know that it's not enmeshment. And the only other thing we know on the other end of the continuum there is abandonment. So even if you're the one setting the boundary, it can still feel like abandonment. So you probably know this from the world of romance. Even if you have broken up with someone, you're the one that initiated the breakup, you can still feel abandoned because they were there and now they're not. Same thing with boundaries. Even if you're the one initiating the boundary, it can feel like abandonment. So it could feel like they're abandoning me, even though I initiated it, or you could feel like, oh my God, I'm horrible, I'm abandoning them. And that's because we don't know any different. So we're responsible to each other and for ourselves. We're not responsible for other people. We're not supposed to be each other. We're supposed to love each other. So it should be more like this and not like that. So healthy separation is the goal, or healthy connection is the goal. So not enmeshment, not abandonment. We want healthy separation and healthy connection. And ironically, boundaries give us healthy connections. And when we have healthy connections with other people, it means that we're telling them the truth about what's okay and what's not okay. Now, here's another way to think of boundaries and property. And that is, I want you to start thinking of yourself and your life as if you are your property. And if you think about it, and so now this idea is I want you to start thinking of yourself like I'm my property and I am in charge of my property. Well, one of my friends in recovery said this to me one time. You know, people don't put fences around property they don't value. So if you had this dilapidated building, you're probably not going to put a fence around it. But if you put time and energy and effort into fixing it up, you'd be much more likely to put a fence around it. Well, here's the thing about building boundaries. You don't have to wait until you feel really good about your property to put fences around it, to set boundaries. What's really interesting is that the boundary building process is the process that helps you feel better about yourself. So for me, I came into recovery thinking, I like myself, I have high self-esteem. And as I started doing the work, I was like, man, I don't love myself and I don't feel worthy. If I look back at the drama and the history and the chaos and the substance use and the compulsive overeating and the toxic relationships and situations, that is not the behavior of a woman who feels worthy. And yeah, I may have liked myself, but I didn't love myself. And I also didn't trust myself. That part I knew. I especially didn't trust myself in the romantic partner picking department. I used to say I have a broken picker, and I realized it's actually not just the picker part that's broken, it's the holder on to. Like I would pick them wrong and then I would hold on to them wrong. And what happened for me is through the process of 12-step recovery, and especially the boundary building process, I grew to love myself. I grew to feel worthy. I built to trust myself one boundary at a time. So I got to know myself better by figuring out, where do I end and other people begin? What's okay with me and what's not okay with me? I didn't know that. I was such a chameleon that, and I felt really good about that. I was like, oh yeah, I can fit in anywhere. No, you can't fit in everywhere. So if you don't know who you are, you don't really know where you belong. And so you're constantly grasping at like I got to get somebody to like me here. And when we start building healthy boundaries, we get to know ourselves. We start to give ourselves things we didn't, which is like doing more things that we enjoy and less things that we don't, not putting ourselves in harm's way and in risky situations. And we start to feel better about ourselves. And it becomes easier to set the next boundary and the next boundary and the next boundary. So we want you to make sure that you are not abandoning your property. So what I want you to do now is I want you to list 3 reasons that you deserve to have a fence around your property. So if you personally cannot think of anything, I want you to think of things that a best friend would say to you, things that someone that admires you would say to you, someone from recovery would say to you. But what are 3 reasons you deserve to have a fence around your property? So I'll give you a minute for that. Okay, I am going to move forward. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. So what I'd like to do now is a request that people just take a couple of minutes. And if you have a phone, you can either take a picture of the QR code, it will take you to a link. If not, you can go to the link that is written right there. And if you type in the word recovery, I'm asking you to give me feedback, because the more I hear from other people, the better I can do for other people in the future. And if you do that, you're going to get this, I think it's like a 6 or 7 page handout. And I call it How to Prioritize Your Precious Resources of Love, Money, Time, and Energy. So there's many different kinds of boundaries, but the idea here is we have love boundaries, we have money boundaries, we have time boundaries, and we have energy boundaries. And many of us just give those things away to other people and don't even, sometimes we give them away and we have nothing left for ourselves. Sometimes, even if we have some left for ourselves, we still don't give them to ourselves. So this worksheet is going to help you think through that, and it's going to have you do it within the framework of what matters to you. So if you would take a couple minutes to go ahead and do that, I'd appreciate it. If you don't want to do it, that's perfectly fine. And then I will I'll give you a couple minutes, or I'll give you like another minute and a half for that. And then I'm going to share my thank you screen, and I would like to take a bio break and then come back and answer questions. And as I said, I'm happy to stay on. I know that we're supposed to end at 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is 35 minutes from now. I can stay on for a little bit longer than that if that's necessary. If not, so I just want to thank everybody. I especially want to thank Nicole for bringing me in. I want to thank Patrick and Matea. If you're the kind of person who listens to podcasts, I love it if you'd listen to mine. It's called Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. I have 300 and something episodes, over 40 of which are about boundaries. And then my favorite place to hang out on social media is on Instagram. I have a ton of free content about boundaries there. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And
Thank you, Barb.
yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to answer questions.